My name is Beverly, and I'm 58 years old. The Thanksgiving dinner table fell completely silent when my son Marcus slapped me so hard I nearly fell from my chair. The sting on my cheek burned as hot as my shame. His father, my ex-husband Richard, stood behind him with a satisfied smirk. But instead of breaking down in tears, I looked my son straight in the eyes and smiled. "Thank you," I said calmly. The confusion that washed over his face was immediate. He expected tears, submission, shame. Let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe, because sometimes the most powerful weapon against violence is the reaction they don't expect. My marriage to Richard lasted 25 years, though in hindsight, it should have ended much sooner. We met in college, both young and ambitious. Richard was charismatic, driven with a forceful personality I mistook for confidence. The first few years were good, or at least I convinced myself they were. The red flags were there, but love has a way of tinting everything rose-colored. The first time Richard hit me, Marcus was only 3 years old. It was over something trivial, a dinner that wasn't ready when Richard came home after a difficult day at work. His palm struck my cheek with such force that I stumbled backward against the refrigerator. The shock paralyzed me more than the pain. Richard immediately apologized, crying and promising it would never happen again. I believed him because I wanted to. I needed to. But it did happen again and again. The cycle became familiar tension, explosion, remorse, reconciliation, until the next time. Richard was careful to never leave visible marks, to never hit me where others might see. He was respected in our community, a successful financial advisor with a spotless public reputation. No one would have believed me anyway, or so I thought. Marcus grew up watching this dynamic. As a little boy, he would hide in his room during the worst of it, covering his ears with his hands. Sometimes, he would come find me afterward, wordlessly bringing me a tissue or his favorite stuffed bear. Those small gestures of comfort broke my heart more than the abuse itself. "Why do you let Dad talk to you that way?" he asked me once when he was about 10. I had no good answer. As Marcus entered his teen years, I noticed the changes. He began mirroring his father's mannerisms, his tone, even the dismissive way Richard would wave his hand when I tried to express an opinion. My sweet, sensitive boy was disappearing, replaced by a miniature version of the man who made me feel worthless. I tried to counterbalance Richard's influence. I took Marcus to volunteer at the local shelter, hoping to nurture his empathy. I pointed out examples of healthy relationships, suggested books and movies with strong female characters. But I was fighting against the daily examples set in our own home. How could my words compete with what he witnessed every day? The breaking point came after 25 years of marriage. Richard had been drinking, angry about a missed investment opportunity. The argument escalated until he shoved me so hard I fell backward down 3 stairs, fracturing my wrist. Marcus, then 22 and home from college, witnessed the whole thing. I expected him to defend me. Instead, he helped me up and said, "Mom, you really shouldn't push him when he's been drinking. You know how he gets." That night, lying in the emergency room, waiting for my wrist to be set, I made my decision. I filed for divorce the next week. Richard was furious, but to my surprise, he didn't fight it too hard. I suspect his administrative assistant, with whom he'd been having an affair, had something to do with that. The divorce granted me half our assets and the small house we'd bought as a rental property. Richard kept our main home and most of his retirement accounts. I became a 5th-grade teacher, finding purpose in nurturing young minds and creating the safe classroom environment I wished I'd provided at home. Marcus sided with his father during and after the divorce. Richard's narrative that I was emotionally unstable, that I'd driven him to his rare lapses in judgment, that I'd abandoned the family took root in Marcus's mind. Our relationship became strained, our conversations superficial and infrequent. When Marcus met Heather in graduate school, I harbored hopes that her influence might soften him, might help him see the truth about his father. Heather was kind, perceptive, with a gentle strength that reminded me of who I might have been without decades of emotional erosion. They married quickly, and within a year welcomed their daughter Lily. Becoming a grandmother reawakened something in me. When I held Lily for the first time, I silently vowed that she would never witness what Marcus had, that the cycle would end with him. I tried to be present without being intrusive, supportive without overstepping. Heather became my unexpected ally, often serving as a buffer between Marcus and me, gently correcting him when his tone became too harsh or dismissive. Richard, meanwhile, maintained his influence over Marcus. They met weekly for golf, followed by drinks. After these outings, Marcus would often cancel our plans or be especially cold during our interactions. Richard had remarried and divorced again in the decades since our split, but his bitterness toward me seemed only to intensify with time. My life settled into a quiet routine. I retired from teaching at 55, filling my days with volunteer work, book club meetings, and occasional visits with Lily when Heather could arrange them without antagonizing Marcus. I dated occasionally, but found greater peace in my independence than in pursuing another relationship. When Heather called to invite me to Thanksgiving dinner, I was surprised and touched. Family holidays had typically been spent with Richard's family, or in recent years with Heather's parents. I accepted immediately, looking forward to creating new holiday memories with my granddaughter. "We want to start our own traditions," Heather explained. "And your family, you should be here." I didn't know then that Richard would also be invited. I didn't know that what should have been a step toward healing would instead bring decades of tension to an explosive head. The week before Thanksgiving brought a growing sense of anxiety I couldn't quite shake. I called Marcus on Monday to ask what I could bring to dinner. "Heather's handling everything," he replied, his voice flat and disinterested. "Just bring yourself." The conversation ended there, no warmth, no excitement about spending the holiday together. Despite his response, I decided to make my special pumpkin pie, the one recipe Marcus had always loved as a child. I still remembered how his eyes would light up when he smelled it baking, how he would hover in the kitchen, waiting for the first slice. Perhaps this small gesture might bridge some of the distance between us. On Wednesday morning, my phone rang. Seeing Heather's name on the screen gave me a momentary flutter of anxiety. "Beverly, I wanted to call you directly about this," she began, her voice careful. "Richard will be joining us tomorrow for dinner." The shock of her words left me temporarily speechless. "I know it's unexpected," she continued into my silence. "Marcus invited him without discussing it with me first. I only found out yesterday." "I see," I finally managed to say. "May I ask why?" "Marcus says it's about healing old wounds and bringing the family together for Lily's sake," Heather explained, though I could hear the doubt in her voice. "I wanted to give you the chance to bow out if you're uncomfortable. I would completely understand." My first instinct was to cancel immediately. The thought of sitting across a table from Richard, of enduring his subtle jabs and manipulations, made my stomach clench. But then I thought of missing another holiday with my granddaughter, of surrendering this territory to Richard once again. "Thank you for letting me know, Heather. I'll still come," I said, surprising even myself with the steadiness in my voice. After hanging up, I called my closest friend Anna. We'd met in a support group for domestic abuse survivors years ago, and she knew my history intimately. "You don't have to do this, Beverly," she insisted after I explained the situation. "It sounds like a setup." "I can't keep avoiding him forever," I replied. "Besides, I refuse to miss seeing Lily, and honestly, I'm curious to see what Richard's angle is." "Just promise me you'll have an exit strategy," Anna said. "Park where you can't be blocked in. Keep your phone charged, and call me the second things get uncomfortable." I promised, though I knew in my heart I would endure almost anything to spend time with Lily. And perhaps there was another less noble motivation. I didn't want Richard to think I was still afraid of him. The day before Thanksgiving, I went shopping for a gift for Lily and a new outfit for myself. I selected a deep burgundy sweater that brought warmth to my complexion and a pair of black slacks that fit perfectly. Looking good would be its own form of armor. For Lily, I found a beautifully illustrated book of fairy tales, the kind where the princesses rescue themselves. I wrapped it carefully in paper covered with turkeys and fall leaves. Thanksgiving morning dawned crisp and clear. I spent extra time on my appearance applying makeup with care and styling my silver-streaked hair. The face in the mirror looked back at me with determination. I was no longer the young woman who had trembled at Richard's moods. I had built a life without him, found strength I never knew I had. The pumpkin pie sat on my passenger seat as I drove across town to Marcus and Heather's suburban home. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and I realized I was rehearsing what I might say to Richard, how I would respond to potential provocations. I took a deep breath. I would not let him control my emotions, not anymore. As I pulled into their driveway, I noticed Richard's sleek black Mercedes already parked there. He had arrived before me, already establishing his territory. Some things never changed. I gathered the pie, and Lily's gift took another steadying breath and walked to the door. Heather's Thanksgiving decorations greeted me as I entered their home. A harvest wreath on the door and paper turkeys that I assumed were Lily's handiwork displayed prominently on the refrigerator. The house smelled of roasting turkey and cinnamon, but underlying the holiday aromas was an unmistakable tension. Heather answered the door, relief washing over her face when she saw me. "Beverly, I'm so glad you came," she said, embracing me with genuine warmth. "Grandma!" Lily's excited voice preceded her as she came running from the living room. At 3 years old, she was a perfect blend of her parents, with Marcus's green eyes and Heather's honey blonde curls. I set down the pie and gift to scoop her into my arms. "There's my sweet girl," I said, breathing in her scent of baby shampoo and graham crackers. "I've missed you so much." Marcus appeared in the hallway behind her, his expression guarded. "Mom," he acknowledged with a nod. No hug, no smile. Just that single word laden with unspoken resentment. "Happy Thanksgiving, Marcus," I replied, determined to maintain my composure. "Thank you for having me." He glanced at the pie in my hands. "You didn't need to bring anything. Heather made dessert." Before I could respond, a familiar voice called from the living room. "Is that Beverly finally arriving fashionably late, as always?" Richard appeared in the doorway, drink already in hand, though it was barely noon. At 61, he still maintained the handsome features that had first attracted me, though years of bitterness had etched permanent lines around his mouth. He wore an expensive sweater and slacks, his gray hair perfectly styled. "Hello, Richard," I said evenly. "It's been a while." 3 years, 2 months, he replied with the precision he'd always used as a weapon. You're looking your age," Heather quickly intervened. "Beverly brought a pumpkin pie. Isn't that thoughtful, and a gift for Lily, too?" Richard smirked. "Always trying to buy affection, aren't you, Bev?" I ignored the jab and turned to Lily, who was eagerly eyeing the wrapped package. "Would you like to open your present now, sweetheart?" With Heather's nod of permission, Lily tore into the wrapping paper, her excitement providing a welcome distraction from the adult's tension. Her delight at the book was genuine, and she immediately asked me to read her one of the stories. "Maybe after dinner," Marcus interjected. "Lily, go wash your hands, and then you can help Mom set the table." As Lily reluctantly left with Heather, Richard settled himself in what was clearly his chosen spot on the couch, directly across from where I stood. "So Beverly still living in that little rental house must be quite an adjustment after the life I provided." "I'm quite comfortable," I replied, refusing to take the bait. "The smaller space suits me." Marcus returned from the kitchen with a drink for his father. The ease of their interaction made it clear this was a regular occurrence. They shared an inside joke, both chuckling while glancing my way. "Marcus tells me you've been interfering with how they're raising Lily," Richard said casually, "trying to push all those progressive ideas about gender and whatnot." "That's not true," I said, looking to Marcus for support that didn't come. I've simply given Lily books and toys that encourage her to think for herself. Marcus frowned. You got her a doctor's kit and told her she could be a doctor instead of a nurse. Heather's mother is a nurse. The absurdity of the criticism nearly made me laugh. I think Lily can decide for herself what she wants to be. See what I mean? Richard said to Marcus. Always undermining parental authority. She did the same thing with you. It's why you had such a rebellious phase in high school. Marcus's rebellious phase had consisted of joining the debate team against his father's wishes. Richard had wanted him to focus exclusively on sports, building the athletic prowess that Richard himself had never achieved. I was saved from responding by Heather's call to dinner. As we moved toward the dining room, I offered to help bring dishes to the table. No need, Heather said quickly, her eyes darting to Marcus. Everything's ready. Just have a seat. The seating arrangement told its own story. Richard sat at the head of the table with Marcus to his right and Lily beside Marcus. Heather sat at the foot, leaving me the seat between Heather and Lily directly across from Richard. I was grateful for the buffer of my granddaughter's presence. As we settled in, I noticed how Richard seemed to dominate the space, how Marcus unconsciously mirrored his posture. The table had been set with care, autumn-colored placemats and napkins folded into leaf shapes, a centerpiece of pine cones and miniature pumpkins. Heather had clearly put effort into creating a beautiful holiday atmosphere despite the undercurrents of tension. Who wants to say grace? Heather asked as the last dish was placed on the table. I think Richard should, Marcus said quickly before I could volunteer. He's the patriarch of the family. Richard smiled, satisfied with the deference, and bowed his head. We followed suit, and I tried to focus on gratitude as he spoke the words that would begin our disastrous Thanksgiving meal. For the food before us, the family beside us, and the abundance in our lives, we give thanks. Richard intoned his voice, carrying the practiced cadence of public speaking. And we especially thank you for bringing our family together today, healing old divisions. Amen. The hypocrisy of his words made my stomach clench, but I murmured amen along with everyone else. Dishes began circulating around the table. Heather had prepared a traditional Thanksgiving feast, complete with turkey stuffing, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, and cranberry sauce. Everything looked delicious, though my appetite had disappeared the moment I'd seen Richard. This all looks wonderful, Heather, I said sincerely, serving myself small portions I wasn't sure I could eat. Thank you, Beverly, she replied with a grateful smile. The stuffing is my grandmother's recipe. Heather's become quite the homemaker, Richard commented. Unlike some women who are always too busy with their careers to put proper meals on the table. I focused on cutting a piece of turkey for Lily, who had been placed between us, likely as Heather's attempt to prevent direct confrontation. Would you like some cranberry sauce, sweetheart? I asked her, ignoring Richard's barb. Yes, please, Grandma, she replied, her innocent voice a balm to my frayed nerves. As the meal progressed, Richard dominated the conversation, regaling the table with stories of his business successes and golf achievements. He repeatedly referenced our past, always with subtle distortions that cast him as the hero and me as the villain. Remember that Thanksgiving at the lake house, Marcus? Richard asked. Your mother was so upset because the turkey was dry. She locked herself in the bedroom and refused to come out for the rest of the day. What had actually happened was that Richard had criticized my cooking in front of his parents, then followed me to the kitchen, where he'd grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises, hissing that I was embarrassing him. I'd gone to the bedroom to hide my tears from our guests. I remember you brought me pie in the bedroom, I said quietly to Marcus. You were about 7. Marcus frowned, his brow furrowing, as if trying to reconcile the conflicting memories. Before he could respond, Richard changed the subject. So, Beverly, do you follow politics at all these days? Or is that too taxing for you? Richard knew perfectly well that I had always been politically engaged. During our marriage, he'd belittled my views, calling them naive and uninformed. I stay informed, I replied, simply unwilling to be drawn into a political debate. Marcus and I were just discussing the latest tax proposal, Richard continued. It's going to punish success again, reward laziness, but I wouldn't expect you to understand the economics of it. I saw Heather tense, clearly hoping to avoid controversy. Lily, she said brightly, tell Grandma about your new preschool. But Richard wasn't finished. Your mother always had a soft spot for handouts, Marcus. It's why she was such an easy mark for charity cases. My volunteer work at the women's shelter had been a particular point of contention in our marriage. Richard had hated the time I spent there, the independence it represented. Supporting vulnerable people isn't a weakness, Richard, I said, my voice calmer than I felt. It's basic human decency. Richard's eyes narrowed. Always the moral superior, aren't you, Beverly? Tell me, did your moral compass point you toward breaking up our family? Toward depriving Marcus of a stable home? That's not what happened, and you know it, I replied, feeling the familiar tightening in my chest that his accusations always provoked. Dad, Mom, not today. Marcus interjected, though his tone made it clear he was more annoyed with me than with his father. Richard stood ostensibly to refill his drink. As he passed behind Marcus's chair, he paused, leaning down to whisper something in our son's ear. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw Marcus's expression darken, saw his jaw clench, and his shoulders tense. The change was immediate and alarming. Marcus's face flushed red, his eyes fixing on me with sudden fury. I'd seen that expression before on Richard's face, countless times before an explosion of violence. You know what, Mom, Marcus said, his voice tight with anger. Dad's right. You're the one who destroyed our family. You're the one who gave up. You're the reason everything fell apart. I started to respond to defend myself, but before I could form the words, Marcus was on his feet. His movement was so sudden that Lily startled beside me. You abandoned us, he shouted. You walked away from your commitment, from your family, from me. And then it happened so quickly, I had no time to react. Marcus's hand swung through the air, connecting with my cheek in a stinging slap that rocked me sideways. The force nearly toppled me from my chair, and I had to grab the edge of the table to steady myself. Silverware clattered and water spilled from a tipped glass. The shock silenced the room completely. Heather gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Lily began to cry, frightened by the violence and the tension. And Richard, standing just behind Marcus, wore an expression of smug satisfaction that sickened me to my core. The sting of the slap radiated across my cheek, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional blow. My own son had struck me, had crossed a line I never thought he would, despite all the warning signs. In that frozen moment, with everyone watching for my reaction, something shifted inside me. A lifetime of tears and fear and submission crested and broke, washing away in a sudden tide of clarity. I straightened in my chair, looked my son directly in the eyes, and smiled. Thank you, I said, my voice steady and clear. Marcus blinked, his anger momentarily displaced by confusion. He had expected tears, pleading perhaps even for me to leave. My smile disoriented him completely. What? He stammered, his hand still raised as if caught in the act. I maintained my smile, feeling a strange, powerful calm spreading through me. I said thank you. Thank you for showing me exactly who you've become. I continued, my voice steady, despite the throbbing in my cheek. Thank you for making it crystal clear. Marcus stood frozen, his hand slowly lowering to his side. Confusion replaced the anger in his eyes as he struggled to process my unexpected reaction. I rose from my seat and moved toward Lily, who was still crying, frightened by the sudden violence and tension. I knelt beside her chair, taking her small hands in mine. It's okay, sweetheart, I soothed. Grandma is fine. Sometimes grown-ups make very bad choices, but everything is going to be all right. Lily's sobs quieted as she studied my face, her eyes wide and uncertain. I brushed a tear from her cheek with my thumb, giving her a reassuring smile. "Beverly!" Richard's voice broke the silence, carrying a note of warning. "Don't be dramatic. Marcus just lost his temper for a moment. You always did provoke people." I stood still, holding Lily's hand, and turned to face my ex-husband directly. The smile never left my face, and I saw uncertainty flicker in Richard's eyes. "You know what's interesting, Richard?" I said calmly. "For years, I was terrified of that exact look you have right now. I would do anything to avoid seeing it, but now I realize it's just the face of a bully who's losing control." I turned to Marcus. "Your father whispered something to you just before you hit me. What was it, Marcus? What words gave you permission to strike your mother?" Marcus's face paled. He said you were manipulating everyone, that you always played the victim to control people. And in response to that, you physically assaulted me," I stated simply. "Do you see what just happened?" The cycle continued. His anger became your anger. His violence became your violence. Heather had risen from her chair and now stood beside Marcus, her hand on his shoulder. But her eyes held no support for him, only shock and disappointment. "This is the legacy your father left you," I continued. "This is what you learned growing up in our home, that when a woman displeases you, when she challenges your narrative, violence is an acceptable response." "I'm not like him," Marcus protested weakly. "Aren't you?" I asked. "You just slapped me across the face at a Thanksgiving dinner in front of your wife and child because your father whispered some poison in your ear. What would you call that?" Richard stepped forward. "That's enough, Beverly. You're turning this into a bigger deal than it is." Marcus apologized. "No, he didn't." Heather interjected, her voice quiet but firm. It was the first time she'd spoken since the slap. "He hasn't apologized at all." Richard glared at her. "Stay out of this, Heather. This is family business." "I am family," she replied, straightening her shoulders. "And I won't stay silent while you try to normalize what just happened." I felt a surge of respect for my daughter-in-law's courage. She turned to Marcus, her expression grave. "This isn't the first time, is it?" she asked him. "The anger, the intimidation. You've never hit me, but there have been moments when I thought you might. When you've thrown things, punched walls, screamed so close to my face, I could feel your breath." Marcus seemed to shrink before our eyes. "Heather, don't," he pleaded. "No, this needs to be said," she insisted. "I've watched you struggle with your anger for years. I've made excuses for you to myself and to others, but what you just did crossed a line that can't be uncrossed." I gently lifted Lily and placed her in Heather's arms. The little girl clung to her mother, her eyes still wide and frightened. "I've spent 25 years being afraid," I said quietly. "Afraid of Richard's anger, afraid of losing my son, afraid of being alone. But I'm not afraid anymore." I looked from Richard to Marcus. I endured decades of abuse because I thought staying was the right thing for our family. I believed the lies, that it was somehow my fault, that I deserved it, that I could fix it if I just tried harder. But violence is never the victim's fault. Never. Richard scoffed, but I could see uncertainty in his expression. The script wasn't playing out as he'd expected. "You've been poisoning Marcus against me for years," I continued. "And I've allowed it by staying silent, by not fighting back. But that ends today." I turned to leave the dining room, my purse and coat my only concern now. "Where are you going?" Marcus asked, panic edging into his voice. "Home," I replied simply. "I've had enough." I retrieved my coat from the hallway closet, my movements deliberate and unhurried. Though my heart raced and my cheeks still stung, I maintained an outward calm that felt strangely empowering. My hand was on the front doorknob when I heard rapid footsteps behind me. "Mom, wait!" Marcus called, his voice stripped of its earlier anger. "Please don't go." I turned to face him. His eyes were red-rimmed, his composure shattered. He looked suddenly younger, vulnerable, in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. "Why should I stay, Marcus?" I asked quietly. "So you can hit me again, so your father can continue poisoning whatever relationship we might have had." "I'm sorry," he said, the words seeming to catch in his throat. I don't know what came over me. I've never done anything like that before, I swear. "Haven't you?" I challenged him. "You may not have physically struck anyone, but Heather just made it clear this isn't the first time your anger has turned threatening. The violence was always there waiting." Marcus flinched as if I'd slapped him. "I'm not like him," he insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "Then why did you hit me?" I pressed. "Why did your father's whispered words give you permission to do exactly what he did to me for 25 years? Marcus had no answer. He stared at the floor, shoulders slumped. Richard appeared in the hallway behind him. "Beverly, you're overreacting as usual. It was barely a tap. Stop trying to turn my son against me." I met Richard's gaze steadily. "I'm not the one who turned anyone against anyone, Richard. You did that yourself when you taught our son that violence is how men solve problems." "Dad, please," Marcus said, raising his hand. "Just give us a minute." Richard's expression darkened. "After everything I've done for you, you're taking her side after she abandoned us." "I left an abusive marriage," I corrected him, my voice level. "I didn't abandon my son. You alienated him from me." Marcus looked between us, confusion evident on his face. "Dad, can you just go back to the dining room, please?" Richard hesitated, clearly reluctant to cede control of the narrative. Finally, with a dismissive wave, he turned and walked away, but not before shooting me a look of pure venom. When he was gone, Marcus spoke again. "Why did you smile after what I did? You smiled. Why?" The question surprised me. "Because in that moment, I saw everything clearly for the first time," I replied. "I saw the cycle of abuse continuing into the next generation. I saw you becoming him, and I saw that I didn't have to accept it anymore." "I don't want to be like him," Marcus whispered, and I heard the frightened little boy beneath the man's voice. "Then don't be," I said simply. "It's a choice, Marcus. Your father chose violence. He chose control and intimidation. You can choose differently." Heather appeared in the hallway, Lily no longer with her. She must have put the child down for a nap or left her in her room with a distraction. "Beverly, please don't leave," she said. "Not like this." "I can't stay in the same house as Richard," I replied. "Not after everything that's happened." "Then he'll leave," Heather said firmly. She turned to Marcus. "Your father needs to go. Now." Marcus hesitated, torn between the two influences in his life. I saw the struggle play out on his face, years of conditioning battling against the shocking clarity of what he'd just done. "She's right," he finally said, his voice stronger. "Dad needs to leave." Richard, who had apparently been listening from the dining room, stormed back into the hallway. "This is ridiculous. I'm not going anywhere. Beverly's the one who should leave. She's turned this whole day into a melodrama." "No, Dad," Marcus said, standing taller. "You whispered in my ear and I hit my mother. That's not normal. That's not okay. And I need you to leave my house now." Richard's face contorted with rage. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me, by siding with her." "I'm not siding with anyone," Marcus replied. "I'm just seeing clearly for the first time in years. Please leave, Dad." For a moment, I thought Richard might become physically violent himself. His fists clenched at his sides, a vein throbbed in his forehead. But Heather had already picked up her phone her finger hovering over the emergency call button, and Richard noticed. "Fine," he spat. "Call me when you come to your senses. She's manipulating you just like she always has." He grabbed his coat from the closet and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the pictures on the wall. The silence that followed was profound. "I need help," Marcus finally said, his voice breaking. "I don't want to be like him. I don't want Lily to grow up afraid of me." "There are programs," I said gently. "Therapy, anger management. I can help you find resources." "Why would you help me?" he asked, genuinely bewildered. "After what I just did?" "Because you're my son," I replied simply. "And because I believe people can change if they truly want to." "I do," he said, and the tears he'd been holding back finally spilled over. "I really do." For the first time in years, I saw genuine remorse in my son's eyes. Not the calculated regret Richard had perfected to keep me in line, but true understanding of the harm he'd caused. "I can't promise I can forgive you right away," I told him honestly. "What happened today broke something between us, but I'm willing to try if you're serious about getting help." "I am." He nodded, wiping at his tears. "I'll do whatever it takes." Heather stepped closer to him, though I noticed she maintained a slight distance. "We need to talk about what this means for us, for our family," she said. "Things can't go back to how they were." "I know," Marcus acknowledged. "I know that now." I looked at them both, this young couple at a crossroads. "I think I should still go," I said. "You need time to talk, and I need time to process everything that's happened." This time, neither of them tried to stop me. Heather stepped forward and embraced me. "Thank you for your strength today," she whispered. "You may have saved our family." I hugged her back, hoping she was right. As I walked to my car, I felt lighter somehow, as if a burden I'd carried for decades had finally been set down. My cheeks still stung, but my heart felt strangely, cautiously hopeful. 6 months after the Thanksgiving incident, I sat in the small coffee shop waiting for Marcus to arrive. These monthly meetings had become our new tradition, a neutral space where we could rebuild our relationship one careful conversation at a time. The early days after Thanksgiving had been difficult. True to his word, Marcus had enrolled in an anger management program specifically designed for men who grew up in homes with domestic violence. He'd also begun individual therapy, unpacking the childhood trauma of witnessing his father's abuse. Our first few meetings had been stilted and uncomfortable. The weight of what had happened hung between us, impossible to ignore, but difficult to discuss directly. We started with small talk, careful and polite, like strangers getting to know each other. "How's work?" I would ask. "Busy," he'd reply. "The Parker account is taking up most of my time." Gradually, as weeks turned to months, something began to shift. Marcus started asking questions about my childhood, about my life before Richard, about who I was as a person beyond being his mother. It seemed he was truly seeing me as an individual for the first time. In turn, I learned about his struggles with his father's expectations, how Richard had undermined any interest or talent that didn't align with his vision for his son. The pressure to be man enough by Richard's toxic standards had nearly broken. Marcus had driven him to recreate the very behaviors he'd feared as a child. Heather and I developed a closer relationship as well. She would call me weekly sometimes to discuss Marcus's progress, sometimes just to chat. She brought Lily for visits without Marcus at first, then later as a family when things began to improve. "He's different," she told me during one of our private lunches. "There's still work to do, but he catches himself now. When he starts to raise his voice or get that look, he stops. He takes a breath. He walks away if he needs to. He's trying so hard." Richard had not taken the rejection well. After being asked to leave Thanksgiving dinner, he had bombarded Marcus with calls and texts alternating between rage and manipulation. When Marcus stood firm in his boundaries, Richard escalated to showing up at his workplace, creating such a scene that security had to be called. I told him I wouldn't see him again until he acknowledged his abuse and got help, Marcus explained during our third meeting. He called me ungrateful and weak, said I was under your spell. That sounds familiar, I said softly. I can't believe I never saw it before. Marcus shook his head. All those years I don't know what I thought. That you were exaggerating, that it was normal, that you somehow deserved it. That's what abusers do, I explained. They distort reality until their version becomes the truth, even to those watching from the outside. Now, as I watched Marcus enter the coffee shop, I noticed the changes in him. He moved differently, less of his father's swagger in his step. His smile when he spotted me seemed genuine, reaching his eyes in a way it hadn't for years. "Hi, Mom," he said, sitting across from me. He no longer called me Mother, the formal address Richard had insisted upon after the divorce. "Hello, Marcus," I replied. "How was your week?" "Good, actually," he said. "My therapist and I had a breakthrough about some things, and Lily lost her first tooth." We chatted easily about his daughter's milestone, about the garden I was planting, about a book we'd both happened to read. The conversation flowed naturally now, without the landmines of the past, waiting to explode with one wrong step. "Heather wants to host Thanksgiving again this year," he said suddenly, watching my reaction carefully. She thought maybe we could create a new tradition, replace the memory of last year with something better. I considered this. The thought of Thanksgiving still brought a twinge of anxiety, a phantom pain on my cheek. But perhaps there was wisdom in reclaiming the day and creating new associations. "I'd like that," I said finally. "Will your father be invited?" Marcus shook his head firmly. "No, he still refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing or seek help. Until that changes, I can't have him around Lily or Heather. Or you." His protective inclusion of me in that statement warmed something long cold within me. "I volunteer at the women's shelter now," I told him. "Twice a week. I help women who are where I once was, trying to find the courage to leave to start over." "That's amazing, Mom," he said, and I heard genuine admiration in his voice. "Does it help working with them?" "It does." I nodded. Healing isn't just about what happened to you. It's about what you do with it afterward. Marcus was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about that moment when I hit you, and you smiled. It completely disarmed me." "That wasn't calculated," I admitted. "It was just what happened. In that moment, everything became so clear. The patterns, the cycles, how Richard had programmed both of us. My smile was recognition, I think. And maybe a little bit of freedom." Freedom. Yes. For so long I'd been afraid of Richard's anger and then of your disapproval. Afraid of being alone, of losing my family completely. When you slapped me, it was like the worst had happened, and I survived it. What was left to fear after that? Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'll spend the rest of my life making that up to you." "It's not about making it up to me," I said gently. "It's about breaking the cycle. It's about Lily never experiencing what you experienced, never feeling what I felt. It's about healing what's broken in both of us." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I promise you, Lily will grow up in a home without violence, without fear. I swear it." As we finished our coffee and prepared to leave, Marcus hugged me goodbye, a genuine embrace, without the stiffness of obligation. Walking to my car, I reflected on how one horrible moment had ultimately led to healing. My smile, in the face of violence, had broken something open, had created space for truth to enter. This year's Thanksgiving would be different. We would gather around a table free from Richard's toxic influence. We would create new traditions based on respect and love rather than fear and control. And perhaps most importantly, Lily would grow up seeing healthy relationships modeled, learning that love doesn't hurt, that strength isn't measured by the ability to dominate others. Have you ever found unexpected strength in a moment of crisis? Has standing up to someone who hurt you changed the dynamic forever? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of healing and transformation. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message, share this video with them. Remember, breaking cycles of abuse starts with recognizing them. And sometimes, the most powerful response to violence is not more violence, but the calm certainty that you deserve better. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the strength to smile in the face of your own challenges.